You can drop overthinking today without having to fix anything about yourself. Overthinking is just your brain's way of trying to protect you. Your brain likes to keep you safe. That's why it keeps you running the same loops over and over, because its job is to keep you in a loop of what is familiar. And anytime that something unfamiliar pops up in your life, that's why you tend to overthink a situation, for example, because it's not familiar to your brain. So your brain starts going, yeah, but what about this? Yeah, but what about that? But what about this? And you start feeling, doubtful or fearful, or you start worrying. And that's what leads you into that overthinking spiral. But all you need to really do in order to overcome overthinking is shift who you see yourself as. Because when you overthink, again, it's your brain's way of keeping you in that loop of familiarity. But to break that loop of familiarity, you need to shift who you are internally. Because if you're constantly telling yourself the same stories or replaying in your mind the same experiences, especially if there's something that's unwanted or something that really struck you in a negative way, when you constantly replay those stories or experiences or thoughts in your head, you're staying or you're keeping yourself tied to an identity that does not match what you actually want for yourself. So you could be saying, okay, well, I really want to overcome a certain situation, something that's come up in my life. I want to overcome that. But you start spiraling about it. You start overthinking it because you're straddling a line between I want to overcome this situation or I want to figure out, the outcome to this situation, but I also don't believe that this situation could work because of reasons XYZ. Maybe, again, based on a past experience that didn't go so well, you're relating that past experience to the current situation and why that outcome may not be possible for you because of the past experience, right? So your brain starts to take that into account. Not even starts, your brain always takes that past experience into account because, again, you're telling it that story. And your brain is going to filter whatever that experience was for you, and it's going to keep showing you that experience over and over and over. So that's why you want a certain outcome. You want to be, experience something different, but you feel like you can't. You feel like you're stuck because your brain is trying to keep you stuck, but you're trying to move forward. And you can't be in two places at once. But when you go and shift who you view yourself as internally, meaning when you stop identifying with past experiences, when you stop identifying with things, beliefs, conditions, things that you've learned that do not serve you, or based on that outcome that you want, they don't serve that outcome, things that are contradicting to that outcome. When you are able to drop all of that and step into a version of yourself where you know that that outcome is yours, where you have that outcome no matter what, doesn't matter how you get it, you're standing in that conviction that you are no longer tying yourself to experiences or conditions that you don't want, and you are now a limitless version of yourself who can have, do, and be whatever they want. Because when you shift your identity, that's when your brain starts to also run a new story. So think of it also like this: when overthinking starts, it's like, okay, you have a situation, right? And you want a certain outcome for that situation. And immediately in your mind, you see the outcome. You're like, okay, I want that. Yes, let me have it. But right after you see the outcome for yourself, you start switching into, how will I get it? What if this happens? Should I do this? But what about that? Because that is, again, your brain keeping you tied to that old version of yourself, the old identity that has bad experiences, limiting beliefs, whatever it is. But just because that thought arises doesn't mean that you have to feed it. Because there's a difference between a thought popping up in your mind and continuing to think about it or overthinking, right? So a thought is a thing. And yeah, thoughts will naturally pop up in your mind, and it's okay if they're not favorable. Thinking is an action. You don't have to continue thinking about the thought that pops up into your mind naturally. You could sit there and observe it. You could acknowledge it, but that doesn't mean you have to feed it. And that's when you start breaking that loop of constantly overthinking things in your life. And I say all this based on experience because I used to be a chronic overthinker. And anything that popped up in my life, I was overthinking it. It was just this constant feeling of being trapped in my own body almost, because on the outside I appeared, cool and calm and just like nothing really seemed to bother me. But internally, my mind was always racing. Yeah, but what about this? Yeah, but what about that? How are we going to take care of this? Until I was finally like, you know what? Just shut up. I could not take it anymore. It was driving me crazy. And that's when I realized that, you know what? This is just me tying myself to a version of me that I didn't even want. Someone who felt like I was always unlucky, someone who felt like I could never catch a break. And that was the whole reason why I would constantly overthink things, because I didn't feel like I deserved anything better. And when I shifted my identity from not deserving or not good enough to I am deserving and I am good enough and I am worthy. And then I also played into, or not played into, but I also made sure that I wasn't playing into those negative thoughts that would pop up. I made sure that I was just, okay, I understand that this thought is popping up right now, but that doesn't mean that that's who I am. That doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. That doesn't mean that I have to give it my attention and my energy. I can choose not to actively continue thinking about that thought just because it naturally popped up. I don't have to feed it, I don't have to water it. That's when I was able to stop overthinking. Because, for one, my brain was starting to tie my new version of self, the new version of me that I identified with, someone who is worthy and deserving. My brain started to tell itself that story now. So now my brain was filtering in anything that aligned with being good enough, being deserving, being worthy. So now it's filtering out things that do not match that. You can shift what your brain filters in and out for you again by telling yourself different stories. It's not always fixed, right? Whatever you experience, whatever you go through in life, your interpretation, your perception of things, it's always malleable. It's not static, it's always fluid. And I know it's easy for us to think that things that we've experienced in our lives are hardcore facts, but nothing is ever a fact unless you believe it's a fact. And you can change what's factual for yourself in your own personal life. So, if you feel like this is you, if you feel like you're a chronic overthinker, it's so difficult for you to just break that loop of constantly overthinking things, try what I mentioned in this video. Also, this is the type of thing that I work with my clients as well. So, if you want to work with me, my link is in the description. That does it for this one. I will see you in the next one. I love you. Bye.